Let's talk about in terms of what has been happening in relation to logistics, right? The amount of work that DIRCO has put in
here in the 1950s.
The accreditation process, it was smooth. The facilities that we're using here are the latest technology. Everyone is being recognized by facial recognition. That requires a lot of logistics in place. It requires the best possible systems. And we are also showcasing that South Africa is capable to host an event of this magnitude. I think we have a lot to be proud of as South Africans.
So as we're going to be embarking, or countries and world leaders are going to be embarking on this process, we'll see a process that is also kind of led by DIRCO in terms of Sherpa discussions, right? Whereas you also have the finance aspect that will be taken care of by the National Treasury as well as the Reserve Bank. And there are a number of issues that will be looked at, political and socio-economic issues that will be looked at.
Solidarity, equality, and sustainability. So when countries host summits, they tend to do a little bit better with advancing their commitments.
And these conclusions that we reach here have a multilateral effect, actually, because the UN would look at this and say, what was said in Johannesburg on such and such a day is the appropriate way of looking forward, or it's an appropriate way of addressing some of these issues. And that is what we're aiming for. So, for example, you'd have heard the United Nations Secretary General yesterday speaking about how the UN needs to be reformed. That's one of the core agendas of our foreign policy currently, because if you look at the UN, particularly the United Nations Security Council, it's a structure that was formed in the heydays of colonialism, where there was no African representation. So there's no African representation on the Security Council. Those are issues that are being discussed here. How do we reform multilateral institutions? So what we say here today and what we conclude on Sunday will reverberate across the world. It will not end in Johannesburg. It will continue in other nations as well. You have countries who are not part of the G20 per se, also here. We've got regional bodies such as the AU, well, the AU is a member, but the SADC, ECOWAS, the East African Community, they are also here. So what we're doing today here and over the next couple of days doesn't end in South Africa. And like we've seen, we have been able to continue some of the work that the Brazilian presidency has put on the agenda. And it's inevitable that other presidencies will focus on other issues, but it doesn't negate what is being discussed here.
And you're correct. These decisions will influence policy. You mentioned other bodies, but also the World Trade Organization. Let's talk about in terms of what has been happening in relation to logistics, right? The amount of work that DIRCO has put in organizing and essentially spearheading a gathering of this magnitude.
It's been a collective effort by all government departments. It's not DIRCO alone. Of course, we are the host department per se, and the IMC is led by Minister Ronald Lamola, but it's been a collective effort by the South African government, from the South African police services to the host province, Gauteng, host city, Johannesburg. All of this has come together through collective effort, and really it's been a mammoth task, sometimes difficult. And of course, by nature, there will be challenges, but we've been able to resolve those. I mean, so far, it's been seamless. As a journalist, I'm sure you can attest to the accreditation process. It was smooth. The facilities that we're using here are the latest technology. Everyone is being recognized by facial recognition. That requires a lot of logistics in place. It requires the best possible systems. And we are also showcasing that South Africa is capable to host an event of this magnitude. I think we have a lot to be proud of as South Africans.
So as we're going to be embarking, or countries and world leaders are going to be embarking on this process, we'll see a process that is also kind of led by DIRCO in terms of Sherpa discussions, right? Whereas you also have the finance aspect that will be taken care of by the National Treasury as well as the Reserve Bank. And there are a number of issues that will be looked at, political and socio-economic issues that will be looked at in the Sherpas, right? Particularly that task team that was looking specifically at inequality, because, of course, inequality has a ripple effect on other things: access to healthcare, access to schooling, education, access to a variety of basic fundamental human rights. And this is a report that has already been delivered, and we expect that will also be deliberated upon in these Sherpas?
The Sherpas have concluded the technical processes thus far. So now it's really the world leaders addressing these issues and receiving these reports from the experts. One of the fundamental issues that you have mentioned, yes, is inequality, which is a domestic issue for South Africa first, but it's also a global phenomenon. We are continuing to see a world where the rich continue to get richer, where access to even new technologies like artificial intelligence, the way we determine how artificial intelligence is governed, is very exclusive. And so that's why our presidency, one of the core pillars there is just equality. And this presidency has achieved two very important things already. We've commissioned a report done by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Mr. Joseph Stiglitz, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, which really goes to a central point on how to address inequality. This report also coincides with the Holy See, the Catholic Pope's report, the Jubilee report, and that's just a clear example of how our report already lives beyond the parameters of where we are today. The Africa Expert Panel report led by former Minister Trevor Manuel, you would have heard the UN Secretary General yesterday also saying what the conclusions of that report have found also resonate with what the UN is finding when we speak about the international financial architecture of the world. And those issues are important. Let me try and break it down, because what we're talking about here is how countries are able to obtain debt for development. And we've seen evidence now that countries with a similar profile, just by virtue of where they are found, get different lending patterns. So because we have to fund those from the fiscus. And if you spend a significant amount of that paying for the debt, you ultimately have to shortchange yourself in actually paying for the things that matter the most. So that's why this conference or this gathering summit is quite important, because if we're able to find consensus on those issues, it goes a long way in driving the African continent forward, but also South Africa as a country.
That was Crispin Peary, the spokesperson for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, just speaking to us about some of the progress that has been made and also some of the fundamental issues that will be deliberated upon as world leaders receive those technical reports from the Sherpas. Now, after the summit here in the... We'll come after the break. Stay with us.